And good evening, Frank here with yet another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. We are ready to go with a really exciting show tonight. Should be a lot of fun. Let me bring in my co-host, Chant Hannah, and she will tell us all about our special guest for tonight. Going to be a lot of fun, Chant, so let's get to it.
Okay, Frank, thank you so much. We have a very special show tonight with a wonderful person that we have both become friends with. His name is Buddy. He's a PSI practitioner working with 4 major research groups, 2 in the United States, 1 in Canada, and 1 in France. One of a handful of practitioners who can produce effects under laboratory conditions under the supervision of top scientists. Participated in studies and remote viewing, crystal algae growth, psychokinesis, and much more. He is an experiencer and runs the Alien Protocols YouTube channel. He also co-hosts Reality's Edge with Dr. Simeon Hein. The topics, we have a lot of topics to cover tonight, and I wanted to introduce our guests onto the show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Buddy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Chant. You are really a really special person. Our first conversation was really, really powerful and wonderful. Just meeting before the show. And Frank, you are you're cool too.
Yeah, I know. Well, Buddy, let's get right down to it and tell the folks a little bit about how this show all came about. It was kind of a fluke. We had done an interview with Uri Geller, I guess 2 or 3 months back, however long it's been. And within a few days after, I was popping around YouTube, and I subscribed to your channel, of course, and saw that you were going live at that very minute. So had to get over there and take a look and see what you were doing. And what you were doing within a very few minutes is talking a little smack about our good friend Uri Geller. So let's pick it up from there.
Yes. Well, you know what? I love and cherish these abilities that we all have, and I'm really passionate about exploring them. And Uri is one of those people who's a big representative of our community. And he had done some things recently that I didn't adore, like claim that he was going to use remote influence to change the mind of Theresa May and prevent her from voting for Brexit. And it was just putting out this very negative image about what we do as practitioners. We don't that's not a positive thing to say that we're going to affect people's minds and change their decision making of leaders of countries and things like that. And I thought that also too, kids look up to some of us. And so I like to taunt him, and I taunted him many times, and saying that I would take him on anytime, any place, and have fun with it, and multidisciplinary, double blind, operated by a third party. And that kind of got you and I, Frank, talking about doing a PSI Olympics.
We did. Yep.
Further.
Yeah, we did. We did a little kind of like a quick and dirty remote view that particular night. And it was a little haphazard, but I think we both had some pretty decent success. The pictures, the drawing that I did, and then the drawing that you did it's going to come up in the slideshow later on. But we both did okay. I was very pleased under the circumstances with those results.
It's always a shock and a surprise. The accuracies can be just astonishing sometimes. I mean, I work in several different methods and modes, from color drawings to basic pencil to other forms and ways. And, when you get a real big hit, a perfect hit, it always feels absolutely amazing and electrifying. And it's astonishing that we have this ability and we don't teach it more to each other. We have physical education for our kids, but we don't teach them mental education. This is really important stuff, I believe.
Yes, yes, it is. I thought you were going to jump in there, Chant. It is. We had John Alexander on a few weeks back as well, and we were talking a little bit about remote viewing as a sense, not terribly unlike a lot of the other senses we have. But, let's face it, I need my glasses. My vision's not all that great. My hearing's not as good as it used to be, and a lot of other things. But this, I guess, sixth sense that we have, we might have more than that. I don't know. But the sixth sense that we have is an interesting thing to play around with. I mean, I've always had a lot of fun with it. I got into it quite some time ago, before I even got seriously into UFOs. When did you start realizing that there was something to all this sixth sense?
When I was a kid, I had, my mother was very intuitive. And I saw that I had abilities over time. And I think it's the kind of thing where you just you're either brought up into it or you crash into discovering it at some point later in your life. And for me, it had always been part of the Rolodex. So it never seemed too unusual or too weird. And it's in the past, maybe 8 to 10 years, I've been especially passionate about it. And have been doing a lot of growth and experimentation and adding impediments and working in different realms of it, because I think it's like you say, it is a sense, and none of your senses are perfect. But if you just exercise one aspect of it, I think you have a full psychic body. If you just work on, let's say, just remote viewing, you're not going to do as well, I believe, as if you work on remote viewing and healing and psychokinesis and all the different aspects. So that way you're working on your full psychic kind of body. And each gives you perspective on the other, and allows you a chance to really kind of grow and build up your strength. And so much of it has to do with faith, though. A lot of people are just skeptical, and that just prevents them from opening the door at all. But the more you believe, the more you allow yourself to say, hey, I'm not afraid to fail big, the more these magical events start happening that are just mind-boggling. They really make you reevaluate reality right down to a physical level. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful that these gifts are there for us. And to me, they're all based on empathy, connecting with something, resonating with it, whether it be just remote viewing, where you have to make an empathetic connection and resonate with a distant place or time. And that's also the same exact ability that's needed when healing. You need to resonate with that person, and then you go to the next step of the healing aspect, which is really basically psychokinesis. So I think they're all wonderfully related and connected, and that I just can't recommend enough that people really try to explore these abilities and explore their natural intuition. We all know we have it to some degree. We all have these incidents where who's going to be calling on the phone, or the lottery numbers and you didn't pick them that one day. Or it happens to all of us. So it's wonderful to hear you, Frank, too, say that this is something that's been you've opened yourself up to more and more. And I'm sure the more you open yourself up to it, the more the events will happen.
And we are, like I said, looking to get a little bit, have fun, but get serious about it at the same time. There are a number of independent sites out there that facilitate sort of self-testing of these kind of abilities. I've compiled a few. I'd like to get some more, obviously, but I'd like to go through them now really quick. Hang on a sec.
That's great. A great resource for the audience.
There's some terrific resources out there that are available. And let me go over to the screen, and this might be a little ugly for a moment, but I am going to get to a number of these. And the first one, and this is one that I use fairly often. This is a site called random.org, which basically has a built-in random number generator. And
wonderful.
You can pick numbers from 0 or 1. You can go in, and I'll do this now, between, let's say, 1 and 4 or 1 and 400. It doesn't really matter. And then you just click on generate, and then bam, there we go. The result, this particular true random number generator between 1 and 400 is 351. Now, that in and of itself is not all that exciting, but when you go to some other sites that are available, we've got, I'm going to go to this target practice site here.
That's a neat one, too, because, the range is very big. You could start small. It may sound very daunting to someone to hear, oh, my gosh, how am I going to guess 1 out of 400? But they could start off with 1 out of 4.
Yeah, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3, even 1 out of 2. I think they have done that in the past where there were 0 and 1, where they've been some experiments where the goal was to try to influence the number generator to come up maybe 100 runs, go with 1 more often than 0. And so if you get go ahead. Sorry.
No. I've had a lot of experience with random number generators, and there's also true random event generators, which are the random number generators are humans random. But the true random event generators are based on a quantum real world fluctuation. So you get kind of the universe is random. And, for me, I always prefer the true random event generator because I think it's more random, and it's God or the universe is random. And I've had a lot of success with being able to push numbers up or down. There's 100 years of studies that show that the human mind can do this. And not only that, there's staggering studies that have shown something really neat. There's a famous karate class, and I believe it was Dr. Halley. I'm not certain of the doctor's name, but they did a really cool experiment where they had these karate students try and push random number generators.
Okay.
And what happened was they didn't tell the students that the random number generator was actually repeating the numbers that it had previously picked the previous day. So they were essentially working retrocausally, and that they had success in essentially pushing numbers backwards in time. Absolutely staggering stuff, but real.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. Now, you had said also there was there was the true random number generator, and what was the other one you had mentioned? Because I've never heard of that one before. The event generator. Random event
does
that generate numbers as well, or?
Well, the random number generator is kind of like the one you're talking about now.
Right, that's what I've got up right now, so the folks can see that at home. And let's go with 1 to 400. I'll go with 252. Let's see what comes up. Yep, 309. I wasn't even close, but okay. I mean, basically, you see, folks at home can see how it works. We've got the link, and you can go to the site random.org, and that's the random number generator. Now, the value of having something like this is there are also a number of databases around the internet where you will have a large number. I'm at a site now, remote-viewing.com, that has a target practice page where they've got 120 different images, different
wonderful.
targets. Okay, so what you can quite easily do is obviously change the numbers here from 1 to 400. I could easily pop that down to 120. I can generate a number, and let's say hypothetically, if we're actually working the problem in real time, which we're not doing, we're just playing around and kicking some ideas around, but I'll generate this right now, and let's see what's the number. 51. And okay, let's go back to that particular target pool. Number 51, where's target 51? Target 51 is right there, and I can click on that, and it's an outdoor scene. Looks like a city. Okay, whatever. Okay. And it's a peacock. So there we go. I wasn't close on that, but yeah, we're just again trying to demonstrate for the folks at home what these different sites can do.
And what's really neat about random number generators and all these machines is they're essentially like going to a casino. And I was recently working with Dr. Gallenberger, who's very well known from the Monroe Institute. He's just a brilliant and just a huge compassionate soul. He's wonderful. I spent a week with him there in Vegas, and he does psychokinesis for casinos. Okay. And you basically push random number generators on the slot machines. You can push numbers with the craps table. And I had a very profitable week.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And there are a couple other sites that I want to go through. And again, the main goal is when we, actually get through this process of kind of working things out. The main thing is to have some games set up and have honest games where when we do this, we live stream, we can pull the clock out. Hang on a sec. Let me pull my clock out right now. My computer clock is telling me it's 10:47, and there it is right there. I mean, you can see the clock, no problem. So nobody.
I love that.
Nobody should question the honesty. That's what I want to get to. Is get to the protocols down where nobody says they cheated somehow. These are sites that are independent of me, independent of you, independent of Chant, independent. They're independent sites. So
wonderful.
If the results are good, that's fantastic. And if they're not, well, we still demonstrated a protocol by which you can have you can run an honest game and run some honest experiments in real time and video them and stream them and let everybody have a look at them.
Absolutely. And by demonstrating too, you can demonstrate the different aspects of how there's different techniques and ways that are better to do this than others. There's a natural tendency to just boom, name the whole thing. And that's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. You know, from the greats like Ingo and Pat Price and all these other ones, they tell you don't name the complete object. First, start with the general sensibilities of it. Is it indoors? Is it outdoors? Is it cool? Is it hot? Go through your senses. And you kind of construct the picture easier that way. And you're not getting validation from a person, you know, at each little moment. What you're really doing is kind of just doing a soft sensing, you know, because all your senses aren't perfect. So you're saying, okay, maybe this, maybe that. I'm sensing some outdoors. I'm feeling grass, or, you know, and sometimes synesthesia comes in. I've had a lot of synesthesia with remote viewing. Like I taste a bird singing, a bird song. You're like, how can you taste a bird song? But for some reason in remote viewing, it's a very common reoccurrence of something called synesthesia. And it's okay to have synesthesia in these things. So when people are exploring these different websites, they should keep in mind that they could have these different effects, and to take it really easy on themselves. Start small, go with the small sensibilities, and you don't have to name the whole thing and draw everything in color. You know, start small. Like, why don't you pick a number for me in one of those images, and I'll just do an example and see if, you know, what sort of little subtleties.
Okay. Okay. Let's do this. We'll go back to We'll go to random.org, and they've got 120 pictures in the site that we used earlier. I will generate the number, and it doesn't really matter if you know the number or not. It makes no difference. But the folks at home, if they're watching live, they'll be able to see it. Okay, we've got that number. And let me go over to the website, and I won't pull the target until you give me some feedback.
Okay, I'm sensing, you know, even before you picked the target, I was sensing something, a cold stone, concrete, kind of a stone, a hard, off-whitish, and it has a linear aspect to it. So there's some man-made aspect to it. So I'm also getting a cool breeze for some reason, a cool sense in the air. What else am I getting? What else am I getting? I'm getting a color on the ground, and I'm not sure if it's on the bottom of the image. I'm not sure if it's like an off green made. So that's my first little influences. And oftentimes you will take things like that and write them down, and then some of them might be things called analytical overlay or advanced.
Right.
And
yeah, and explain what that is a little bit to the folks, because that is something where you can get drawn off target a little bit if you go to that a little bit too much.
Very important. Remember how I said before you even picked it, I had some things that came to me? Mm-hmm. That an advanced perception of something else. I could even be thinking of the next target, or it could be something. An advanced perception is exactly what it sounds like. It could be accurate, or it could just be an inaccurate image that your evil subconscious mind pushes into your conscious mind.
Okay, well, you picked 109, so I'm going to go ahead, or the random number generator, came up with 109. So let's go with 109, and let's see what comes up. And there it is. It looks like a Eurasian lady's face, so you're a little off on that one. But okay, you know, but folks are seeing how this will work. Now, there is one game. There's a few different games that I was considering. One is, of course, predicting events, like sporting events would be one where you could maybe knock out 4, 5, 6 different games. And you could do that. That would be one way. I guess maybe using associative remote viewing. That might be one way.
The last one was really fun too. That's great. I love that whole idea of picking a random number and having that associated with a group of random pictures, and that way you can do that alone and have it be completely unbiased. Sure.
I play with that all the time, and well, not all the time, but I mean often enough. I play with it, you know, just to fool around with it. I think it's a lot of fun, and it's one of the reasons I'm so excited to do this. but there are some other sites that are available. This one is the Davis and Davis site. One nice thing about this one is that it's literally, there's a timestamp right within the site. So I opened up this particular page, 7/15/2019, and at 22:52:44. So we've got that, and it actually has this is pretty cool, buddy. You might want to check this out. It actually has a built-in little draw palette to the right of the screen, okay, where you can draw whatever the image might be. And
Cool.
Yeah, that one's pretty cool. And then what you do is then once you figure out what you've got, you just go click next target, and then bam, then you get your target image. In this case, it happens to be a little passport booklet, and then you just click reload the page, and boom. And there's one other site that I want to go through before we. Let me ask you this. I also decided to bookmark a page that does the Zener card thing, and I got to be honest, that is not my favorite experiment. It just you're just too front loaded. After a while, you figure out what the card, what the 5 diagrams on the cards are, and it just. I'm not a fan, but why don't you give me your feedback of that?
The best psychics in history have all said the same thing, that the Zener cards are terrible. They don't go towards your senses at all. They don't help you access any of your senses. They're very dry. It's like trying to pick one out of a deck of cards. And if, people oftentimes lose their faith in their abilities just by 1 failure or 2 failures. And so you need to start with, I think it's much better to start with things that are fun and simple, and also deal with your senses more. So there's no senses involved on the Zener cards. There's those, 5 symbols, and that's it. I've done them, and I've had to do them, and it's it's really not fun. But it's the reality. There's one called GreaterReality.com that I remember that is also a remote viewing one.
Okay, let me go to that really quick and see Greater Reality, just all one word, basically in the URL.
If it's not, there's a dash in between Greater and Reality. But
the Greater Reality and Afterlife, is that it? Oh, a remote viewing test. Here we go. Okay, good man. Okay. Folks will get your remote viewing ability, instructions, learn how to use imagination quiet, blah, 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 start test. Let's take a look at this and see what we got. Okay, each of the codes below represent a target. Click on one of the codes to see the procedure for remote viewing the target. Start with MCSA. Let's go through it, take a look.
And what they do is they have you do different than traditional remote viewing. They have you do something basically called it's fast shot remote viewing technique, where they ask you to blank out your mind, put the little picture frame in your mind, and what's the first image that comes to you.
Now I don't know. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. That's basically it. And part of the difficulty is blanking your mind. It's very difficult. If you're in a situation like this where you're talking and stuff like that, it's a little bit more difficult. But if you're alone and you go to the greaterreality.com, you get the code numbers or letters or whatever it is, right. And then you're able to clear your mind for a minute. And then you put up the blanks, the picture frame in your mind, and then let something come to it. And always go with your first instinct. Always go with it's called the Gestalt.
Right. Yes. The general shape or form.
Yes. Or whatever that first thing is that comes to you. I did a remote viewing for one of Grant's assistants, and it was so weird. My Gestalt, the very first thing that came to me was so weird. I'd never had something like that before. It was a spaceship and a planet and a sun. And I had the shape of the spaceship and everything. And it was the weirdest thing. And I just didn't want to draw it. I didn't want to submit it to her because I felt like she'd be like, ugh, this is so far off. And the irony is, I think I might have sent you that picture as one of the examples.
If you did, it's in the slideshow. It'll turn up. I think people will recognize it.
Stunningly, accurate. And it was the first time that I had a viewing of a UFO that I didn't know was going to be a UFO. So that was interesting. So the Gestalt is very important. Go with that first feeling. Go with your intuition.
Yeah, that worked pretty well the night that we tried which turned out to be the Colosseum in Rome. And that is another picture in the slideshow. My drawing and your drawing as well. I saved those. So that is in there. And when we get back to the slideshow, once I get through these, I'll run the slideshow and show some of Buddy's results and show some of the results that I got going to that Davis and Davis site. But there's another one that lends itself very well to a game. And this is one that I think would be pretty easy to turn into a game where basically you remote view the winning target, but what will happen is the site will generate 4 different images, and then you've got to decide what the top image is. Maybe you think it's second, because this will happen sometimes when you've got a pool of images. There will be similar gestalts or similar elements in more than one picture. If you're
Yes, yeah.
So that makes it a little tricky, and I think it adds to maybe a little bit of the game element, the fun element, and I think it adds to it. But anyway, I'm going to run through this for the folks, and I think they should be able to see this. I hope they do. So you just pick begin. So let's begin, and then you get like a little get ready prompt, and you click it again. It is transmitting. So I'll just close my eyes, and okay, it's a sandwich. Okay. Fine. I'm going to stop, and then end of transmission. So I click continue, and then the 4 pictures are generated. And a little bit of irony here. It looks like a rhinoceros's ass.
Beautiful.
Is one of the pictures. We got some football players, a rhino's ass. We've got looks like some kind of a flower or something, and then some guys looks like on some scaffolding, window cleaning or whatever. So. I hope my mind doesn't work this way, so I'm going to say it's not the rhino's ass. I'll say it's the looks like some weed or a flower or something. That's something.
I think, for me, it's different with each person. I think it's really important to take your time, especially cleaning the slate. There's this great quote from Nagarjuna who says, from 2,000 years ago, if you still your mind like the surface of a lake, you can reflect the universe. And one.
Buddy, reflect on this. I just clicked on the winning image, and it did turn out to be that little piece of weed or flower or whatever with the sun in the background. So there you go. So how do you like that? Well, it's actually, I think that was a little bit more luck than any kind of remote viewing skill. I'm just throwing them out there. But if you did a few of these, you've got your random chance. You could do it by points, where let's say getting the first. Your first pick is the winning image. You can get 3 points. Second you get 2 points. One you get if it's the third number, the third image that you picked, you get 1, and then 0 for being last or whatever. You can play around with the point system, but the nice thing about using something like this is you can actually score it. There's no. There's no room for judging. There's no room for, well, that's kind of close. Yeah, that was good, or that was bad. It's like, bam, it's kind of rigid. There are some breaks to the game, but I think that the whole idea is that you want to have something that you can really score, and that there's no room for any kind of arbitrary. Well, that's kind of close, so that's good enough.
You don't. It's so important in this field is. Don't kid yourself too much. You know what I mean? There's going to be huge coincidences. There are going to be things like that happen all the time. There's universal shapes and things like that. So, keep yourself grounded. Especially early on, there's something called beginner's luck. Oftentimes very early when you're starting this stuff, you get targets really, really, really well. So I think humbleness helps too, but also you need to feel adventurous enough to be able to feel comfortable feeling big, feeling big. A show like I'm just so impressed and thankful that you're trying these on the air live now. Because
I know you're not set up to see this, but if you go back, and even with the volume off, you go back and you look at it, I think we're on the right path. So those are 2 specific games, I think, sort of a pick 4, where you could definitely designate points for if you get it number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever the case may be, and then predicting sporting events, something along those lines, or stock market, or whatever, any kind of future events. The nice thing about sporting events is that hey, sports are fun. So you got that. You got that going for you too.
Absolutely. There's quite a few famous psychics from history who also picked sporting events and did it very well. I'm forgetting the real famous guy's name who used to cast lightning bolts. And
yes, yeah,
Jeffrey
I remember.
Studied him.
I recall what you're talking about. I read about that too.
I'm not familiar with it. Do you know the guy's name?
Oh, I do. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name.
But go ahead.
Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove studied him for a while and wrote a book.
Yes.
And he had this uncanny ability to first of all, he did very well with sports, but he also predicted weather. And he was a little spiteful. Like if someone annoyed him or said negative things, he'd be like, okay, there's going to be this happening and this bad weather happening in your area. And it was way off the charts in terms of unusual weather happenings. And he had a specific hallmark where it was extremely unusual weather combined with UFO sightings and other things. And he attributed it to two mantis creatures who were flying on a ship in orbit. But he also could cast lightning bolts. He went to the UK and they doubted he could do it. And he said, okay, near that light pole down there on the ground, a lightning bolt's going to hit there. Boom. And
right. Yeah, I read about that for a while. I studied that case. It was fascinating. Everything you just said is exactly what I read. And so I'm just going to read a little bit about that. It's called The PK Man, A True Story of Mind Over Matter.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know that's the guy. Okay. I know that Mishlove book.
So I'm just going to read a little bit about it. It says, so begins Jeffrey Mishlove's The PK Man, the true and strange story of Ted Owens, whose claims of powerful psychokinetic abilities given to him by space intelligences were too bizarre and extreme for many to believe. When these claims were ignored or challenged, he purportedly used his powers to produce earthquakes, civil unrest, UFO sightings, strange weather events, and other powerful phenomena. Owens even threatened to down aircraft to garner attention. What I remember about this guy is that he also had kind of he had an ego of mega proportions, and so he was sort of insufferable to a lot of people regarding his personality and his style and manner in which he produced phenomena, because his personality was involved regarding a lot of that. And go ahead.
Yeah. He was a heavy drinker, and in fact, he met all the early guys from SRI, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, when they were just starting to work with Uri Geller. And they said, he kept writing them and he had some accurate stuff. And at one point, Hal Puthoff said, I can't, Uri Geller's, bringing us enough weird attention. Jeffrey, do you want to check out this guy? And that's when Jeffrey kind of started exploring and researching him and following him and documenting him. And I think Jeffrey documented over 200 accurate predictions.
Mm-hmm.
Staggering.
Yeah, fascinating case. I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you.
Yeah, we got to get him on the show one of these days. He is awesome. Jeffrey Mishlove.
Oh, yes. Wow. He's amazing. He's really, really amazing. Wonderful.
Yeah, we love him.
So I've gone through all the sites, and one thing I want to run by you is the issue of burnout. How much of this stuff do you think is doable, say, in, I don't know, a half hour, 45 minutes, whatever the case may be?
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, there's burnout on several different levels. I've been involved in research sessions, and you just get to a point where you're like, I know myself, where the mornings is when I do my best. Evenings is like, I'm an old man.
Right.
I get sleepy and I want to nap and have a sandwich and soup. But each person knows their own prime times. But I also think that pressing yourself, pushing yourself, and adding impediments is really important. And I preached about it so much that people know that that's one of my things. So I remember going to a UFO festival in Joshua Tree, and they were testing me as the Rob Freeman was running the.
We've had Rob on. Yeah, he's awesome.
Oh, I love Rob. And so he was telling the group that, hey, buddy does, remote viewing. He's good. And so they called me, and I was in line at the airport in Newark. And they had me do a remote viewing, and I actually did the drawing too. And I had an astonishingly accurate. I got it that it was basically a camera. I drew it from above and from the side. I drew the strap, the detailed image of his special embossment on the strap, and I also I'm in the Bronx too, so I meditate in the Bronx with all the crazy Bronx sounds, and I think adding really helps because nothing's ever in perfect conditions. So
you like doing that, because I tend to be a big fan of putting the headphones on and having something playing in the background, whatever it is, white noise or whatever the case may be. Here, you're not able to see this, buddy, but this is actually the remote view we did on your channel, this image that's up now. with the Colosseum being the target, and then your drawing, and then my drawing towards the bottom. And we both did a really nice job on that one under, kind of ad hoc conditions. I thought, at least for me anyway,
It's
because I
so
was just
cool.
kind of
It's so
jumping in.
fun. Oh, love it. Love it.
That was nice. That was nice. So you're okay with doing? See, the thing with predicting a sporting event is we'd have to get our predictions in prior to, and then sort of like once all the games are completed. If we used sporting events or if we used the stock market, obviously we'd have to have our predictions in before the market opened, and then do the show after it closed and see how we did, whatever the case may be. But we'd have to kind of like do sort of like a little pregame show. Maybe Chant and I can do that and just say, hey, here's Buddy's predictions, here's my predictions. Maybe we can get an additional contestant. We'd have to do something like that. Whereas the other games would be, we could do those in real time. So.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. We could do something like that. And obviously, any other kind of games that we could do would be of tremendous interest to me.
And I think it's important to let people see failure, because sometimes failure helps give others confidence. It's I used to do a stand-up comedy, and nothing gives a comedian more confidence than watching another comedian suck. So, there's aspects to it too, and everybody has this ability. You may tell yourself, oh no, I don't, I can't do this, I can't do that. Just give it a shot, give it a try. There's little things you can do. You can practice alone. There's this wonderful app from Russell Targ, the ESP trainer. But even if you don't have it, only unfortunately is for iPhone, it's not on Android. But there's all sorts of other little games you can play. And what car is going to come around the corner next? What person is going to come around the corner next? What are they dressed? What are they wearing? All these little things. When I drive to my house, what cars are going to be out front or in the area? And, you can work on your intuition, and it's never 100%, but you can increase those percentages. And it's really all about percentages. And over time, you've got a natural ability, Frank. And the more you work on that natural ability, the more you can increase those percentages. And by doing an impediment, like doing it on the air, is a great one. And I think that accelerates the growth rate and learning.
Well, it should be fun now when we get around to it. And again, we're soliciting as much feedback as we can possibly get. If any of you folks out there who are listening to this know some other sites that you've seen what I've been able to turn up, but if you've got some familiarity with some other sites, by all means, let us know. And we can play around with that. And, it'll be game on next time we do this. But
I would love to. We could even get a third party, someone we trusted, Jeffrey Mishlove, or I just did a workshop with Dr. Simeon Hine in Boulder. I also do a radio show with him, Reality's Edge. But we could find someone who's a third party that's very trustable, who can get these drawings and images for us, and work through with them as well too, and different types of methods. We can work with a traditional monitor too. A monitor will say, are you smelling anything? Are you hearing anything? They don't give you any hints. They just basically remind you of your senses.
Okay.
So there's all sorts of neat options we could consider, but the audience is going to have the best ideas. So I'd love to hear their thoughts.
Yeah, you never know. You just never know.
Psychic Olympics.
Yep. And again, if you come up with it, obviously I can come up with drawings here and I can pop them into the slideshow, in a matter of seconds. What you would be able to do if I don't know. See, I don't know how you're set up in terms of software or whatever the case may be, or you could just take a quick and dirty picture of a pen and a pen and paper drawing and pass that along to us through the Skype chat. Something along those lines, if you want to do that and sort of back up what you're describing. You know what I mean?
I love it. Next time I'll be able to. Right now I'm actually in my truck.
Okay.
I'm in my truck, Bronx. But next time I'll have my computers up and stuff like that. And it'll make it easier to actually see the sites with you and play the games and stuff like that. So that's really exciting, and to be able to draw and stuff like that too. I love drawing, not just describing it. The more you activate your senses, the better. They used to at SRI even have them work with clay, where they would get the target.
Yes.
they'd play with the clay as well too. It sounds like a lot of fun. I've never done that. And it
No,
sounds like
I never
something I
have
really
either.
enjoy doing.
Yeah, it's just basically been the drawings and all that. But you've got some other things. I think I think the folks who are listening at home and looking at home have got the basic gist of what we're trying to do here. And again, we want your feedback, and we want to definitely keep the. The results sort of as independent from us as possible. Again, using random number generators to determine a number of an image database and so on, that kind of thing. If we do well, then no one should question our honesty. And if we don't do well, then we'll give it another shot down the road, maybe. But and have some fun along the way. But you have also got some other things talking about. You were talking a good bit about psychokinesis a little bit. So why don't you go back to that and tell us what. I've never really tried bending spoons or keys or anything along those lines. Why should I want to do something like that?
Well, I think there's a natural progression in these abilities. First, you're able to see, then you're able to touch, and then I think the ultimate in all this is healing. And psychokinesis is that step to healing. The thing that I'm most proud of with our group is we've had so many wonderful cases of really extreme healing cases. I'm not going to brag about it too much, but they've been really miraculous situations that we've been blessed to be a tiny part of the circle of these healings. And that's the biggest and best reason right there. But of course, it's neat to be able to say, oh, you could bend metal or you could do this or that. I personally, I did some of the spoons and cutlery early, and it kind of feels dirty to me. It kind of feels magician-y. And so I moved on to working with metal bars and doing the no-touch version, which is where you wave your hand above it. And there's videos on the Alien Protocols channel where it shows the successes, and I've done this numerous times. It doesn't always happen every time, but there is an ability for all of us to bend reality. And as wacky and goofy as it sounds, it just doesn't sound like it just sounds so unusual and so out of your personal experience. But our mind has an ability to affect reality around us. And the biggest, most important part is that empathy. And of course, having faith and believing you can do it. So you make the connection with the piece of metal or whatever you want to physically affect, whether it be the growth rate of crystals or the growth rate of algae. You do the remote viewing kind of thing first, where you see it and you connect with it. And then you start moving into this level of empathy that's deeper, where you want to physically make change in the object. You visualize that change happening. There's different techniques different people use. Dr. Gallenberger was talking about how when he was working with a machine, he kind of imagined a waterfall, a fountain, and when he wanted the numbers to go lower, he would slash the fountain with a sword, and the fountain would lower and lower and lower. Everyone has their different mental techniques, but believe you can do it, because you can. It's the most bizarre thing to think that you can affect matter and reality without touching it, but you can. Yeah. And that's what healing's all about. Prayer's all about that. I mean, you can skip the metal part and go straight to the prayer and the healing, because there's nothing more gratifying than getting a call from someone saying, it worked. You healed my grandma, or my dog is healthy and running around and happy. And there's so many stories on our site, and it's bragging about it is really, I'm not going to go into specifics, but there's nothing more gratifying than that.
Got it. Chant, do you have anything?
Actually, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some people who were well known throughout history regarding their uncanny ability to be able to manipulate people and alter their behavior through the power of suggestion. They also had powers of clairvoyance to a high degree. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Wolf Messing, who was considered Stalin's personal wizard. And he was known as a magician, a hypnotist, a seer, and a psychic. And a story that I recall that I read about him is, and this was many years ago when I read this, so if I'm hoping I'm recalling it accurately. And that is, Stalin knew about the great powers of Wolf Messing. And by the way, just so everybody knows, he was born in Poland in 1874, and I believe he died almost 100 years later. He actually was asked by Stalin, challenged by him, I believe, to get past all of the guards in Stalin's house to see if he could get to Stalin himself. And so Wolf decided to go ahead and take him upon that, and they didn't decide when he was going to do it. There was no date set on that, and is my understanding. And so then one day, Wolf decided to go ahead and try it. And I don't think Wolf had any worries about it whatsoever. He was known as being extremely confident about his powers. And so he went ahead and went past the first guard of Stalin's house and another in the hallway, and then all the way on up to Stalin's bedroom, where he actually faced Stalin. And Stalin realized he had gotten past every guard to from the very front of his house right on up to where he was sitting in his bedroom. So I thought that was interesting. He also blew his audiences away when he would perform, I guess, around the world regarding tours that he would take. And there were also scientists in attendance who were interested in meeting him and being witness to the phenomenon that he was able to actually, I guess, present to folks regarding his show. And so if people want to find out more about him, I would recommend looking up Wolf Messing, Messing. And then also just wanted to talk to you about something rather interesting. I wrote a really long article on the CIA archives, and in that article, there was a fascinating remote viewing test that took place that's famous now, and I know you already know it very well, buddy, so I'll just go ahead and read a little bit about that from the article I wrote. It's called Project Stargate and Mars 1 million years BC. The planet Mars, time of interest, approximately 1 million years BC. Sounds like what was that?
It was Joe McMoneagle, right?
Exactly, yeah, sounding like a Ray Bradbury novel. This is from the diary of a remote viewing program hidden under the guise of a few names. Operation Stargate, a U.S. Army-related parapsychology experiment, was one of those top-secret programs. It also inspired the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. Moving on, Mars 1 million years BC was recorded on May 22nd, 84, named Mars Exploration. This odd diary was written when The Terminator, The Year We Made Contact, Starman, and Firestarter was out. They were hitting theaters around the world. Prior to the Mars remote viewing diary, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which, as you know, in that movie, he had a very interesting relationship with the young boy where they actually had they could feel each other's feelings. And Blade Runner came out during that period of time. And the need to watch aliens on the big screen became a necessity for sci-fi movies aficionados everywhere. Now, moving along to this. The RV remote viewing program was both a domestic and international intelligence program under the designation of U.S. Army intelligence. It was used to reach into the minds of enemies of the U.S. and to pursue intel on an extraterrestrial race of beings on Mars. How this kind of planet knowledge could help the U.S. was known only to the U.S. government. Now, the reason why I read all that is because this fascinating experiment that occurred that was under the umbrella of Project Stargate and a few other projects, I suppose. There's just too many of those psychic programs to name. The grocery list is too long. What's fascinating about it to me is the index card that the person pulled out with the latitude and longitude for the remote viewer to be able to determine what they saw on Mars 1 million years ago. And those latitude and longitude numbers came from the Jet Propulsion Lab. Now, What's interesting to me about this is that area, and Frank can chime in on this, of course, interrupt me at any time, please, to correct me. I believe that area had to do with the Mars face, right, Frank?
Yep,
And
that's exactly
right
where it was. That was
now,
the latitude and longitude on Mars. Yep.
and thank you, Frank, for confirming that. That area was where the Mars face is. Now, what my question is this. How in the world did Jet Propulsion Labs, JPL Labs, know to give those series of latitudes and longitude numbers to a remote viewer? Mars is a pretty big planet. Why that area? How did they know about that area?
Well, they were suspicious, obviously, from photographic evidence.
Right, exactly.
And this really, how this ties to UFOs is this all of this stuff connects together wonderfully. If you look at there's something that came out recently called the Chris Mellon leak. And the Chris Mellon leak has, it's a congressional briefing. It's what they were taking to Congress to brief them about the conclusions of ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And they had a series, the most important page in all of that is what's called Slide 9. And Slide 9 is the vulnerabilities of the United States based on the study of these craft and the abilities that they presented. Case after case after case. And these are all exclusively military cases. And if you look at that list on Slide 9, they are all powers of psi. They are things like affecting the minds of decision makers, moving objects through physical matter. And you can see that the CIA reading room, there's China has done a tremendous amount of work in this area, and other countries have as well. And I can't get into too much more on that, but there's also instantaneous sensor disassembly, which is these UFOs were not just shutting off different aspects of jets or nuclear missiles. They were disassembling physically. Somehow physically things were being disassembled. And there's a list of these things, these greatest vulnerabilities that the government assessed, and they are all psychic abilities. And not only that, they also said the advantages that the U.S. government had, and that's one is that they had some of the world's premier experts in these fields, and that they had locations of repeat occurrences. And you can imagine what those locations of repeat occurrences are, things like Malmstrom and, nuclear sites and Sandia, other places where there's a lot of nuclear stuff. So this all really ties together. And you have to say to yourself, if there is a field of some kind that we haven't figured out yet, and it unifies all these different abilities, you would predict that an advanced civilization might know about it and utilize it. And apparently, from ATIP's conclusions of our greatest vulnerabilities, it sure looks like whatever is messing with all this stuff has these different abilities. So I think if the government takes it seriously, it's not a lark. These things aren't a lark. Frank and I aren't fanciful, thinking that we can see things, that we don't have the direct access to non-locally. This is real stuff.
I have a question for you. So I'm going to read you something first. It will take me about 1 to 2 minutes to read it. And then I have a question for you regarding it. So I'm going to read a conversation from the person who is holding the index card regarding the exact coordinates of Mars to the RV participant regarding that 1 million years BC session. And here's an excerpt of it. The subject says, I'm seeing it's like a perception of a shadow, people, very tall, thin, only a shadow. It's as if they're there and they're not there anymore. The monitor then says, go back to a period of time where they are there. The subject says, I just keep seeing very large people. They appear thin and tall, but they're very large, wearing some kind of strange clothes. They're ancient people. They're dying. It's past their time or age. The monitor says, tell more about this. The subject says they're very philosophical about it. They're very, very philosophic about it. They're looking for a way to survive and they just can't. The monitor says, all right, now before you leave this individual, ask him if there's any way that ask him if he knows who you are, and is there any way you can help him in his present predicament? The subject says, all I get is that they must just wait. Doesn't know who I am. Think he perceives I am a hallucination or something. The monitor then says, go along with them on their journey and find out where it is they go. And the subject ends with saying, impression of a really crazy place with volcanoes and so on. Now, my question to you is this. When the monitor asks the subject to go ahead and communicate 1 million years ago to a dying race of ETs on Mars, does that mean that affects the timeline for that planet and for ours? And how does that work?
I don't think so. I think there's been enough experiments that have been done that show, in terms of the mechanics, that it's a quantum collapse model and not a teleological model, meaning that you can go backwards in time and have a conversation with someone, but that will be part of that time period, and it works both directions. It's all one unified retrocausal and forward causal equilibrium. So that event that happened where it was Joe McMoneagle went backwards to communicate with them always happened. So now here's where it gets a little weird. They did a series of tests to see which was correct. Teleological means you can go back again and again and again and again and keep changing it. It doesn't matter. They did this clever experiment where, they had several different psychics going after a target in the past. And if it was quantum collapse, the first psychic would consistently do better than the second psychic. And if it was teleological, it would be random. So they found consistently, and I think this was Pear Labs, who did that ongoing, one of the best research projects into psi. So I think it's the nature of the timeline is when you go backwards like that, especially if you're going by in remote viewing, you're not going in a body, you're not changing anything dramatically. I think it's all incorporated in the first time. It just seems like it's because you're going backwards in time, you feel like you're changing something, but maybe it's always been both of those things happening. So maybe that extra tall race person has always spoken to, Joe McMoneagle and didn't know. That's my belief.
I would like to also ask you, who determines the moral or ethical aspect of remote viewing, and also the ability to manipulate the behavior of people through the power of suggestion and so on remotely?
It's very important when you ask. It's a very, very important question because there are sides to this. And that's why I got upset with Uri, because trying to use remote influence on a leader of a country. I think the Yoga Sutras put it so well that this is your gifts and your power level comes from walking the path of virtue. And some of the most powerful and wonderful things I do in terms of helping people or their lives has nothing to do with these abilities here in the Bronx. And to me, it's about the walk and the path, of virtue. But, each person has to be their own regulator of these things. You morally know. It's like being a gun owner. This is powerful stuff you have. People are scared of some of this stuff. I'll be honest. I had an event or a couple events where things were pretty intense, and some people get scared by this stuff. Some people will look at this as being satanic, or some people will think just because you talk to them, you can entrain with them more, and maybe you can affect them more. Or if you get mad at them, something can happen to them. And there's case history for that. There's evidence for that. But it's just like being responsible with anything. If you're going to do something, like this, and you get to a certain level, you have to be incredibly responsible and moral. I don't remote view friends. I don't remote view, our own government. I don't, depending on the aspect of it. You I would never hurt a fly. I would never, it's a really important thing for me. And I think each person is their own little moral compass, and what they choose to do and how they choose to do it with these abilities will affect the power, the strength, and the dynamic nature of their abilities. So if you are good at this stuff, be careful what you choose to do, because if you cross the wrong lines, you're going to lose the ability. I mean, it's story after story after story about that.
Yeah, I wanted to mention the person who actually was the individual reading those set of coordinates, and that was Robert Monroe, who you know very well about his history, the altered consciousness researcher and founder of the Monroe Institute, which you've already talked about. He was the monitor asking the questions of the subject for this meeting between he and Mick Monagle. I believe, I have to look it up, but I believe that Mick Monagle is married to Robert Monroe's daughter, Lori Monroe.
There's a really interesting story about Mick Monagle as well, too. He was doing viewing, and all of a sudden into the remote viewing, I may not have all the details correct here, there was a UFO. And they said, stop, wait, we want you to do a remote viewing of that UFO. From a satellite picture, and they said, we want you to do a remote viewing of the UFO. So he did, and then they asked him to do the engine of that UFO. And so for a while, a few years ago, I was friends with Dr. Jack Sarfati, who's well known as physicist and kind of a renegade physicist. And he asked me to get that image of that engine. And so I did a remote viewing of Joe McMonagle doing a remote viewing of the engine of that ship. So you can do all sorts of weird things, but you have to do it ethically. Like that he had an upset stomach that day. I had all these different details about him physically and about his target. To me, that was not unethical. But the interesting thing about that UFO and that the engine, the schematics that he drew, they're still classified.
I see. That's fascinating.
What about what you drew there,
What
Mr.
I
Buddy?
drew, I'll send it to you.
I did want to make a correction, and that is Monroe's stepdaughter, Nancy, later married Mick Monagle. So that way, I was able to correct that. But yes, I wanted to also ask you, do you feel that, Buddy, that it's possible that people with extremely strong psychic abilities who are also able to produce interesting phenomena have always, over the centuries, over the eons, so to speak, tried to manipulate leaders of countries or leaders of social situations, that's just something that has happened many times over throughout history?
Oh, absolutely. And right now, Russia, I think it was in Newsweek, has 6 buildings across the country dedicated to screening and training people. And I have a strong feeling that they utilize those groups and those teams often. And the average society wouldn't, average American wouldn't think, oh, what could psychics do? Well, you might be really surprised what psychics can do. And I think there are governments now. China is well known for utilizing and actively using these abilities and training people. So, the United States is very far behind in terms of this stuff. I think it's very real. I think it's a logical extension of the 2-slit experiment. And that hopefully our government is using this stuff and at least to counter some of the negative stuff that's being done against us. But there's active groups all over the world now, and I think it's always been done. I think there's been sages and shamans throughout history, even, from Egyptian priests who would use these abilities in all sorts of different ways. King Arthur had Merlin, and that's a classic stereotype of that person with abilities who stood by a big leader, and big leaders have oftentimes seen the value, like you were saying with Hitler and and Messer.
Mhm.
It's a fascinating question, and the implications are startling. And
Yeah, I know Jean
more
Dixon was a pretty famous psychic in the 60s through the 70s, and she used to get into the White House, and Reagan had his own personal astrologer.
Yes, and you know what? If you watch Russell Targ's new movie, Third Eye Spies, there's a great scene where they ask Jimmy Carter, and he says the most amazing thing he saw in his presidency was the work of this group of psychics. That's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I know. The one thing that really blew his mind was there was a Soviet spy plane that went down, basically in the jungle in Africa, and they couldn't find it. But the remote viewers found it. We talked with Alexander about that a little bit, and that is a pretty interesting story. And it's also very interesting because a lot gets talked about these days about crash retrievals, supposedly UFO crash retrievals. But the U.S. has always gone to great lengths to try to pick up the other guy's stuff, and of course get our own stuff back in hands. Anything that comes down. There's the story about the Soviet spy plane, and I don't know if you're old enough, buddy, to remember the Glomar Explorer, the Howard Hughes ship that pulled a Soviet sub off the Pacific Ocean floor. They spent a lot of money. That's an incredible story. No psychic work there, but they knew where the sub was. It was just a question of getting down to the bottom of the ocean and getting it. And Hughes' company designed a ship, and they got, well, at least they got part of it anyway.
And to me, all this discussion and these abilities are about human potential. And in the United States, there's a lot of fear because of religion. People, are fearful of UFOs because it could be satanic. People are fearful of these abilities because they could be satanic. But what this is really about is human potential. And we know that we're in the middle of a mass extinction. There's no doubt about it. There's great adversity potential in the future of all these different adversities coming together. And we need to, and we should, unlock our children's potential so that they can remake the future how they want to with these abilities. They can maybe survive better than they would without these abilities.
And you had mentioned in our notes back and forth before getting this together about the fractal universe model. And to be honest, I don't know anything about it, so why don't you tell us all about it?
Well, basically that our universe is an interactive universe. It responds to consciousness. A lot of people say, consciousness is primary or matter and energy is primary. But no, it's actually a tapestry. You cannot conceive of one without the other. You cannot have consciousness without matter, and you can't have matter without consciousness. It has no meaning. And so it's a tapestry. So if you touch this part, it affects consciousness. You could feel it. And whether you take a very strict interpretation of the fractal aspect, like, for example, look at a Mandelbrot set. And if you look at an image of a Mandelbrot set, there's a lot of other identical little Mandelbrots just over the horizon. And maybe we're resonating with another, universe that's just like our Mandelbrot set, but just over the horizon. But regardless, this universe is certainly interactive. And it's been made that way on purpose. Consciousness affects reality. We know from the two-slit experiment and a bunch of different types of experiments that reality leaps into action when consciousness observes it. And so, for example, it's conceivable that a lot of these locations and places and hauntings and events could be made and constructed by consciousnness and not even known. Terence McKenna believed this. A lot of the great thinkers, Jacques Vallée has this very strong belief in this. Jung believed this as well, too. And basically what could happen is, let's take this as an example. Let's say that a person has, we'll call them a PK displayer, a psychokinesis displayer. This is someone who has the ability to affect space and time a little bit more than the average person, okay? And if you look at a lot of the work of Dr. Kit Green, he talks a lot about prodigious savants with these brain injuries and UFO incidents and radiation exposures, okay? And for some weird reason, it was a lot of prodigious savants. And What if you have a prodigious savant who's under a tremendous amount of pressure? You bottle them up, they have no spiritual release, and things can happen. For example, you are a ball turret gunner in a B-52 on your second to last mission in World War II. Poof, Foo Fighters. You are part of a group of religious zealots who are with 3 young women who say that an event's going to happen, and you're surrounded by other religious believers. Poof, Fatima. You are a operator of a nuclear missile launch site where your finger literally determines the fate of humanity. One button push of you and you're down underground in this hole. Poof, Malmstrom UFOs, repeat cases. You can look at a lot of these cases throughout history, locations that have repeat occurrences, and they could strictly just be based on belief alone. And that acts as kind of like a magic feather for people to unleash these psychokinetic abilities. So it sounds outrageous, but you could go to a haunted location. There's a lot of places that are haunted for generations. And how could that be? Well, maybe they're oftentimes when they first notice these locations, there's a young person who's like disturbed, and they are oftentimes credited later on with creating these hauntings or movements of objects and things like that. But if location is very haunted, just the reputation might make other people believe that. There's a famous ranch out there where people believe all these things all the way back to the natives. And maybe it's just the belief that it's haunted, or that it's special, or that it's thin, that makes these people who are prodigious savants under pressure and a bunch of other factors that come together to allow these major psychokinetic effects. So that's part of the interactive universe model, that our universe can do things that we don't fully acknowledge now, because we don't truly understand the nature of how reality is a combination of consciousness and space-time and matter and energy. So you might be a lot more powerful than you think. Your brain and your feelings and your sentiments might imprint on reality more than you think. So every time you think a negative thought, it could really be affecting the world. Every time you think a positive, loving, warm thought, it really could be affecting the world too.
The butterfly effect.
The
butterfly effect.
Absolutely. Prayers of healing to help work. We know that from science. So we know a mind can affect matter. And so I just think everyone really needs to take responsibility for their consciousness. And even if they're depressed and down, negative feelings affect our world, I strongly believe. And so do those positive feelings. And
I have a question for you, buddy. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to know, because China had a study that got out, some reporters found out about it. They covered it in Omni a while back. It's called China's Psychic Children.
Yes,
so just an excerpt from it. I'll read a quote. It says, that a group from Beijing Teacher Training Institute announced that its young charges could cause an operating radio transmitter to disappear from one room and show up in another, and also wanted to mention that these kids were given Chinese characters to read by putting them a set of Chinese characters in their armpit area, and they were able to read the characters just fine, or actually reading the by 85%, by the way. And then also another experiment, they scored 91% rate on hidden messages in a separate study, and also the color of the pencil used to write each message when they were writing these Chinese characters.
Not only that, they have high-speed film, and this is in the CIA reading room, and there's even some snapshots from the high speed of their ability to move objects into a safe into a test tube or out of the test tube and out of the safe.
Right. I just put that link into our chat room, by the way, regarding what we're talking about here. So my question to you is this: since there's countries that have money, because we know China has a lot of money, and
A lot of our money.
right, exactly, a lot of our money, which is an understatement. Since we know that they are a first world country and they're a superpower, and they have access to super psychics, so to speak. Is it not rational to imagine that they could be using these kids for weapons, weaponizing them, so to speak, against other countries, or to find out anything about our country and so on?
They absolutely are doing that now, and so is Russia. And I believe I've got all sorts of beliefs, and I've done a lot of personal investigation on this stuff, and I think there are astonishing things that have been done. I
Well,
think
you admit. I'm sorry. I finish up, and I've got a question for you. A little follow up there.
No, I just think that the Russians have done an amazing amount of different things with them, and of course they wanted Trump to be elected, and they utilized every different ability they had, and psychic ability was part of that as well.
Got it. Now, you had mentioned Kit Green earlier, and he spent a good bit of time actually living over there in China, from my understanding, and working with them on different psychic type experiments. And I was wondering what you thought about that.
I just know that the psychic ability of the Chinese and the Russians is very real, and that, you know, for Russia to have 6 buildings across the country, that what they screen, train, and then go operational, says a lot. What are they doing in those operations? You can imagine a lot of positive things we could do with these abilities. The other day, I did a remote viewing about Otzi, the famous mummy. These abilities can be used and have been used for archaeology. They've been used for all sorts of different things, and we could just... It's so much untapped possibility here. And that's why I think it's really important to start with the kids. And I think if we taught kids that by using their empathy, they could have magic powers, I don't think we would have another school shooting. I think if kids really knew that they could, with empathy, connecting, resonating, that they could have real superpowers, that we would have a better country, a better future, and they would have a better chance. You know, I'm a strong believer. I know it's pessimistic. I know a lot of people think a magical wave's going to come through the universe and turn sociopaths into tree huggers, but I believe that there is a convergence of eschatological dangers, not just 1 or 2, but a whole bunch of these dangers, and that we have to be as prepared as possible. If you think that ETs are crashing ships on purpose all over the planet, that says something. And they're collecting DNA and material of all the biological life forms and storing it and leaving with it. All that, you put those pieces of information together there, you can draw your own conclusion, what they think is going to happen or is happening. And I think... No, please go ahead.
No, I want to hear the rest of what you have to say, please.
I think it's obvious that these craft didn't crash because we shot them down, or because they're poorly constructed, they fly across the universe and crash. I think they're doing, they're faking it. They crash craft so that we could have the advanced technology, so some of us, the humans, could leave the planet ahead of the schedule that unfortunately we're not going to make if we did it naturally. They had to kind of break the the golden rule of non-intervention, and so therefore they've taught every country a little bit about this technology. Experiencers, people who are picked up by these craft, are oftentimes taught how to fly the craft, but not only how to fly the craft, how to fly multiple drones from the craft as well. So I believe that there's a very good possibility that these advanced intelligences are dropping these craft around the world, so that some of us, and it won't be the average broke person, it'll be the elite and governments and, top people like that. They will get to be able to leave the planet at some point, but other people have to stay and fight. And I want to stay and fight, and I think we need these abilities. I think we need to unlock them and not be fearful that it's a satanic, or not let the. I'm a believer in God. I'm a believer in Christ as well too. So for me, all of this stuff has a context in there. So it's surprising when people use religion against UFOs and against these abilities. But I think we're in very troubling times.
Wanted to mention an interesting author by the name of Peter Moon, who I will be interviewing. I believe it's next month. And he wrote an interesting series of books about Montauk, New York, and Montauk Island. And there's a character in there by the name of Duncan Cameron. He's well known. And he said that regarding the Montauk Project, raw sexual energy was used to ignite the psychic energetic levels of the experiments performed. I actually can't read the rest of that because it's not a good idea. But the whole idea, not a good idea.
It goes there. Okay.
I'm glad it did. I'll just leave it at that. But I guess what I'm getting at here is, do you believe it's true that at times, purposefully done here with intention, sexual energy is created in order for a person who practices remote viewing ability or psychic abilities in whatever manner they choose to use them, is ever used and used effectively? In other words, is sexual energy ever used as a tool, and can it be used in an effective manner to be able to travel through time with your mind, to go backwards and forwards, etc.? How do you feel about that?
I say no. I think it's a distraction. I think you have to, still your mind like the surface of a lake in order to, have these places and times and stuff come to you. And sexual energy is oftentimes a big distraction of all that stuff. It's empowered by these very materialistic, physical hormones and things, and a biological necessity. And although people like Ingo Swann wrote Penetration, it was not really about sex. It was about the act of going underneath, going in, connecting, empathy, all these different things. So, for me, sexual energy is a very human kind of a thing. And I don't believe in any of the Montauk stuff. I'm a very non-conspiracy guy. I don't believe, Nazi reptilians, and I don't mind anyone who does, I don't blame them. And I could be wrong on any of my thoughts and my beliefs, and I accept that possibility. But I like to be as grounded as I can.
Right, and I'm glad you feel that way. Now, I had another question for you that's going to disappoint you. And that is Aleister Crowley, the most wicked man on the planet, as he was described, the wickedest man in the world. According to reports, Crowley himself had used the practice of sexual magic in order to manipulate time itself, communicate with disembodied entities, and to travel interdimensionally. By the way, I'm reading that from an article. So I wanted to know, these famous people, these iconic people who allegedly used this kind of what is your belief system? I think I can already guess, but I wanted you to please give us your opinion and your perspective on that.
Well, first, Aleister Crowley was very powerful. He was very gifted and stuff like that. But I think the sexuality he was just a horny dude.
Yeah, just a guy looking to get laid, basically. So
Newton didn't get all of his energy from sexuality. I think he got his energy from his mind, actually, the exact opposite. But sometimes people are compelled and driven as a human being by their sexualities. And those are oftentimes lumped and mixed and used as a manipulation to get more sex. I'm thankful that I'm 50 and not, have as good of abilities at 18 when I was, super horny, because then I might have been less ethical.
I was trying a lot of remote influencing in those days, and it just didn't work for me.
Yeah, the beer helps. Booze helps, the kind of different type of influencing. But for me, I think that's just an aspect of humanity, and people will use their psychic abilities to manipulate more sex for themselves and more sex life. And also sometimes when you're exploring the edge of things, you really want to also explore the edge of sex as well too. And I think they're very separate. I think, but people manipulate others, even like cult leaders, Charles Manson, and many other people. They have ultimately a sexual motivation, and they may have other abilities too, but they try and lump them together for others to believe. But it has nothing, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with the ability, how good you are at the ability, or any of that.
Okay. Now I
And
wanted to move.
just
Go
to
ahead.
follow up on that before
Yeah.
we let the whole thing go. Also, you hear a good bit about various and sundry mind altering substances involved in all this, and I just wanted to get your opinion on that as well.
I think it's far better to learn to control your own mind and abilities naturally. You can have the experiences, but it's like, do you want to put on a jetpack and rocket to the top of a mountain and not really be sure if you're going to make it there or not? Or do you want to walk up and know the path and to the top of the mountain and back? There are dead ends and there are false trails and all sorts of things with hallucinogens that can trick you and lead you astray. And it's far better to have natural control over your body and mind. I also feel the same thing about boosts and supplements. I feel it's far better to do all of this stuff naturally as far as you can first with your own mind and your own body and your own abilities before you start adding on these other things. There's no shortcut. You can race, you can take there's a variety of hallucinogens. And even Terence McKenna was someone who spoke very highly of a lot of these different things. And you can talk to machine elves all day, but they're not going to give you the true insights into the esoteric world that you would get sober. You could get a lot of confusing mixed messages, dead ends, double backs, and all these different things that are not really real. But, I highly do not recommend it.
Got it. Okay, Chant, you wanted to go again?
I was so involved in listening to him, I forgot my question. No, but I know I can remember it. Just give me a moment here. I know I wanted to bring something up that was important. Oh, yes. No, I remember what it is now. Now, going back in time to some of the first cave paintings on the planet that we've discovered, which go back thousands and thousands of years ago, indicate that there may have been ET intelligences that visited our planet on a frequent basis. And who knows, they may have also lived with us. There's nothing to refute that, by the way, what I just said. But anyway, then I wanted to mention something else oddly at the same time. And that is that a little background history on Russia. Quantum science and other physics used in parapsychology research started in Russia around 1921. And I have a link to that information I'll share in the chat. But there is an essay written on it called Unconventional Research in USSR and Russia, a short overview. And it reads kind of like a science paper. And this author who wrote it also notes a recognized unorthodox school of mental suggestion had been established in Russia before 1917. Now, I'm going somewhere with the cave paintings and what I just said there with the ETs. Being represented in them, possibly, and then this. So just one moment. This unorthodox school of mental suggestion had been established in Russia before 1917. The experimental methodology and formulation of their wide-ranging experimentation was helped along with the networking of Russian and European researchers. Eventually, this mysterious parapsychology and multiple phenomena-related program became known as a Soviet program. Electrophysiology, telepathic radiation, bioinformatics, ESP to psychotronics are some of the enigmatic terms used in this highly researched paper. Now, where I'm going with this is these terms which are kind of outdated and not really used that much these days, and then some terms you've used now which can probably parallel these terms. What I was going to ask you is, do you believe that ETs may have taught us, no matter what we call the phenomena or different kinds of phenomenons we've discussed tonight, do you think that ET intelligences introduced the idea of it to us, or was it self-discovery, or a combo of both? What is your idea on that?
I think it's self-discovery. I think there's a lot of misinterpretation of history. When you look at ancient cave paintings and petroglyphs and stuff like that, it's very easy to see what you want to see in them. Yes, some look more overtly like UFOs and things like that, but I think it's very easy to delude oneself. Also, there's a tremendous amount of religious iconography and stuff from the 1600s and even 1500s that's wildly just misunderstood. They have these people in these little craft on the eastern side and the western side of paintings. And if you look really careful at these people flying these different little craft, one is the sun and one is the moon. And flying them across the sky. And time again on these, History Channel shows, or George Tsoukalakis will say, this is obviously, it's an alien, And there's oftentimes an image of a beam of light coming down and hitting somebody, and that is the inspiration, the conception of the Virgin Mary getting, that beam of light is being conceived. There's also a famous one of God and Jesus, and they're both touching this ball of earth with these rods that, and then they say it's Sputnik, and there's just all these wacky notions, and that the aliens built the pyramids, when you can just think that pyramids have been built all over the world for a reason. Homes started first as kind of like a little mini teepee, as a little kind of hut, a little kind of pyramid shape. Then we learned that if they made them square, you could have fit more space and more people in there. Then if you put a second house next to that first house, they both would have more structural support. Then one day someone looked at those two squares together and said, I wonder if you put one in the center above both of those, would it stay? And I think it's such a natural progression for human beings to build these things. And plus there's a historical record of the shapes changing over time. There's the famous Snafaru pyramid where they had to change the angle on it because they had put too much weight and they had done it poorly and all this stuff. Then people are like, how did they know the stars and do all these incredible alignments? Well, you know what? There was no city lights, and the stars in the sky must have been so unbelievably amazing at night, from the evening to dusk to dawn. So we give human credit to aliens when I think the human beings were so smart. The Antikythera mechanism is this
Right.
Yes.
hand computer, and it wasn't made by aliens. No one gave us the technology. So I'm not as sure about the long-term alien involvement and how much. But then there's other evidence that I do believe. There's the famous wood carvings, I think from 1562 and 1570. There's two famous wood carvings about these battles in the sky. One was in Nuremberg, and the Sweden somewhere. And those, I strongly believe, were real extraterrestrial battles in the sky somehow. Maybe there's a council that looks over us and someone was trying to bust through the council and get to the planet and they had a war. I don't know. But there's a lot of misconceptions about history and people belittling the amazing abilities that humans have had.
Well, we've had a little history in the last year since you were on with us the last time, and it's been really interesting as far as the UFO stuff. And just wanted to get your thoughts about where we're at now compared to where we were back then.
Oh, it is such a great time to be alive. We're so blessed to have this front row seat to the government finally coming out and saying this stuff. And the implications of this is humongous. Unfortunately, Russia and China and Peru and Argentina and these other countries have incorporated the reality of ETs and psychic ability into the culture. The U.S. hasn't done that. And we have been left at a huge disadvantage because there may be an incident that could happen that can't be covered up. And we are going to be the least prepared out of everybody, out of all the countries. It takes time to think through these aspects of, they're satanic, or is it that they're satanic, or maybe God's creation is far more grand and dynamic than we ever imagined. And it takes some time to address those issues in society. And even Luis Elizondo himself said, part of his huge difficulty was that his direct boss was, he didn't say an evangelical, but had strong religious beliefs against aliens.
Yeah, I think part of the reason there was some trouble there is the guy who ran the program before he did, I believe a gentleman named Lakatsky, was very interested in Skinwalker, and that apparently put a lot of people off internally. That was the big issue.
Yeah, I heard that was one of the issues as well. Lakatsky's a very good scientist, and I think it's very easy to have misconceptions and project your own fears on top of it. And that's our problem with having communication with ET. We're calling them a threat. When if you look at their actions, what do we teach our kids? To fight first or to communicate first? Is it wiser to look at the smashed watch or even a brand new watch, or is it wiser to talk to the watchmaker? I think we should be wise enough to talk to the watchmakers. I think we should reach out and try and communicate. Do exactly what we teach our kids to do. Be evolved, not say that they're a threat. I could give you 100 different cases for every negative case you give me. 100 positive cases. And I think people categorize, obviously, them as a threat because they want to get money. But that cynical thing of categorizing them as a threat could create a whole domino effect of negative happenings. What if ET is like a mirror and will give us exactly what we want? And what if we reflect negativity to them? They might be like, hey, this is what they want. They want to communicate this way, so we'll show them what a little war is like.
Got it.
We don't do that. I think we should be our best us. And the fact that we want to threaten, demonize it just makes me so nauseous. We should be putting up CubeSats, communication satellites. We should have aggressive programs, but not, we need to be smart. These are not stupid advanced civilizations. We don't need to send them prime numbers or colors or any of that stuff. They know every language on the planet already.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. These are not stupid advanced civilizations. That is a very, very true thing to say. It rings true with me. I'm always going to remember that, by the way, that you said that.
And
I love that.
They know every language on the planet.
Right. Why wouldn't they?
Well, what do you? Go ahead, Chant. Sorry.
If they're potentially millions of years ahead of us, if it's possible, they would know all about us.
Absolutely. And there is there's a protocol for communication. And if you look at UFO history, oftentimes it's 2 flashes of light. Someone will take a flashlight and flash like the Allegheny guys on the canoe, and it'll go back and forth twice. And if you don't know the next response, they're bored, they're gone, or they're going to do whatever their mission is. We're smart to know what the next steps are. I know what the next steps are. There are people.
That's just what I was going to ask you next, but finish up, please.
Really quickly, I think on my little farm, I have a little farm up in the Hudson Valley, and I've had all sorts of wacky experiences there, incredible experiences and CE5 experiences. I've also had wonderful experiences with wild animals. And there's a universal kind of communication that you can have. I'm sure you've seen videos on YouTube of people who've taken wild deer and they're eating out of their kitchen a year later. So.
And you see the dangerous wild lions who were raised by some guy, and he goes back and sees them when they're adults, and they remember them, and they're all over them. It's amazing videos. Yeah, exactly.
I think we need to be what we teach our kids, the best us that we can be, and show that communication is better than this violence, and that maybe they're not talking to us. Maybe they're not communicating with us for some really shameful reasons about ourselves.
You had mentioned sociopathy earlier, so that could be one of those reasons.
It's possible. I hate to be so dark. But maybe they're very cynical about our chances.
Well, knowledge is power, though, and I strongly recommend taking a closer look into some of the malignant personality disorders, and I think you do see them manifest all over the place.
Absolutely, and there's nothing to lose from attempting communication.
Nope. Let me ask. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think we would learn a lot more from talking to the watchmakers than the broken watches or even the brand new watches that we have.
And you were talking about the next steps. A year from now, where do you think we're all going to be?
Where do I think we're all going to be?
Yeah.
A
little further down the road or way further down the road?
You know, I wish I had a lot more hope. It all depends on how much we can. I think it's up to the people. It's not up to the governments. I think it's up to the people. And I think that people have to get involved. We have to get off the sofa and stop, criticizing each other and be part of the solution and not part of the problem. I think we can go out there and you can do CE5 contact. You can start a group. You can lobby your local congressperson to be like, let's not consider them a threat. Let's try and communicate first. Shouldn't communication be our priority? Like we teach our kids, not to fight first, but to try and communicate first. There's all sorts of different possibilities and angles. We're only limited by our creativity and our tenacity and intelligence. And there's a lot better ways, I think, than just calling them a threat and finding better and better ways to try and destroy them or recreate their technology so we can destroy ourselves faster. The scariest thing would be a hypersonic, invisible, metamaterial nuclear MIRV missile. And that's coming. And I think hopefully, I pray that we're smarter than that. But, if the people don't rise up and get involved, the governments will make those things. And they may be the last generation of weapons ever. When you really think about it, those weapons, hypersonic, invisible, metamaterial, MIRVs are really scary. So the clock is ticking. And, I think we need to get really involved, really, really involved. And
at the very least, vote.
At the very least, vote, but also to get involved in terms of even just doing something positive in your community, helping somebody, uplifting another person. I think every little example, every little positive action is like a grain of sand at the top of a sand dune. It can affect 2 more grains and 4 more grains. And before you know it, there's an avalanche of good deeds happening. But the same is true with bad deeds. So if you say something's a threat and something's evil and we need to destroy it, those things can propagate too. So it's up to us. It's up to us. It's not up to Trump or to Kim Jong or Putin. We're in very precarious times. And I know they've always said it's the best of times, it's the worst of times, for hundreds of years. But now we can literally say for sure that we're in the middle of a mass extinction and all these different things are happening. And, I don't need to go through all the different aspects, but it takes work to solve these things, and to be part of the solution. So I want to do that. I want to be part of the positivity. And I think a lot of it starts, too, with empowering kids to be the best that they can be, giving them the power of their mind that they've always had, that we have kind of denied them. And maybe they can remake a better future than the incredible burdens that we've heaped upon them by our actions.
Got it. Well, I'm certainly good. Chant, do you have anything more before we wrap up?
I just wanted to go ahead, buddy.
I'm sorry to end on such a morbid note that
And on that note,
well, Diana, we do something. Have a great night, guys.
Yeah. Have a great night and enjoy your tomorrow.
What I wanted to say is the wonderful Dr. Simeon Hine was in chat tonight, and he said this: Buddy did an amazing job in my class and gave us an awesome PK instruction session. Everyone loved it. And he said, I think something else really positive, too. It was just nice to have him join us tonight.
There was something involving a fish session or something along those lines?
Yeah, it was great fish session, yes. I went in and did an announcement on Twitter indicating that we're doing the show. And he very quickly joined us right after that. But I just wanted to thank Buddy for having spoken with us tonight. Now, I just also wanted to mention that Buddy and I had a really fantastic in-depth conversation that lasted quite a while, not that long ago. And, I was very quiet in the beginning of this interview for a reason, because I wanted to hear everything that he had to say. and then I kind of got involved later. And I actually would have been fine not getting involved at all, and I'll tell you why. I just love listening to him. I love listening to everything he has to say. I feel like, and I don't say this often. I know this sounds very narcissistic, what I'm about to say, but, not everybody I listen to do I learn something from all the time. I do learn something from every person, but not all the time. Every time I listen to Buddy, I learn something.
Well, it's just a very undeserving of such a wonderful, sweet comment like that. And your powerful intellect and a powerful spiritual, you helped me in our first conversation, several weeks ago, and I won't get into the details or anything, but you're a really special, magical, empowered woman, and you're making a difference. You're making things better. And, Frank, you got to step up, pal.
Yeah, well, hey, I just work the board, and chip in where I can.
I just work the board. And so anyway, to go on with my appreciation of you, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you feel kind of funny, but we love you.
We do.
Buddy. We do. We love you. We think you're great.
I love you guys too, and I also love Dr. Simeon Hine.
Yes, we love him too. He's fantastic.
We got to get him back.
For mentioning him.
He was on when James was still co-hosting. We got to get him on with you co-hosting.
He's such a great guy.
Yeah, he is.
We thoroughly enjoy. We talk to him on Twitter all the time. I'm always so excited just to see what he has to say, and it's just fun interacting with him. But thank you, Buddy, for all of your time, and I certainly hope that you'll be able to interview with us again, because we just loved having this opportunity to talk to you.
He's committed. He's coming back on to play.
Yes, next we'll play. We'll do some weirdness, and we'll have some fun, and not be afraid to fail big together. So let's go.
Okay.
That's right.
But how about another interview after that, where there's nothing to do with that, but we just talk about other topics as well? How does that sound to you?
Sounds wonderful. I'm so undeserving of that, but I'd be so honored to try my best.
Well, we would be honored to have you. So I think it's a win-win.
I love you guys.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Buddy. I'm going to wrap things up. We've got stuff going over the weekend. Oh, go ahead. You're raising your finger, Chant. You want something?
You cannot forget to mention Alien Protocol's YouTube channel.
Of course. Go subscribe immediately. Alien Protocols. And, Buddy, you must have like 300 videos up there by now.
Yeah, a bunch of really neat stuff from these different models to theories to a lot of tips and examples. A lot of people say, "Oh, I do this or that," or "I talk to blue chickens or whatever." We show blue chickens. We do yaks, not really blue chickens, but Dr. Simeon Hine and I. There's a lot of people who do a 20 and back program. Dr. Simeon Hine and I are a 20 forward program, and so it's very different, and the evidence for that is there. I'm kidding, of course, but there's fun videos there, and wacky and goofy and serious stuff, and stuff you can take home and learn too as well.
Well, we just love how you can be so deeply serious and so intensely humorous at the same time, Buddy.
I'm deliriously operating right now past my prime mental hours, so I love you guys.
Yeah, exactly. We want to wrap up, but man, if the bottom line is, if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. And you obviously are into what you're doing. Chant and I are into what we're doing, and hopefully that comes across to the folks at home.
And one quick last: if there's anything we could ever do, or I could do, or Alien Protocols could do to help anyone from teaching to healing to any of that stuff, please reach out to us. We never charge anything, and it's our honor and such a blessing for us to be allowed into that space if anyone cares to learn any of those things or would like that from us. Absolutely.
Well, good night, everybody. Like I said, we'll be back during the weekend. We've got Chant, you're going to be interviewing basically everyone involved in Phoenix MUFON, all 2,000 members, I believe, you're going to be talking to this weekend.
And if you don't mind, I would like to mention something about that. Frank and I do really large panels. What that means is, what we do large panels, that means we interview large groups of people on a regular, on Sundays, regarding whatever topic is, like current UFO topics and stuff like that. This Sunday, we will be interviewing 20 people. 19 or 20 people from Phoenix MUFON. That's how big our panel is going to be. It's going to be a review of the Unidentified, a series by the History Channel. So that's going to be fascinating. And then I'm going to have the privilege and honor of interviewing very briefly for a very short amount of time Dr. Irina Scott. She'll be in town at the Phoenix MUFON Historical Society building, I believe it is, where they will listen to her do a talk. So that's going to be interesting. I recommend everybody go to that. Listen to Dr. Irina Scott at Phoenix MUFON's Historical Society building. And please do look that up and find out more information on that, because that's something that you should not miss.
Yep, absolutely. So good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we will be back sooner than you think with more stuff for you. So have a good one. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Good night.